Reinforcements were sent. Humanity sent the Deadliest Deathworlders a hook. You want to understand what happened at Corridor Ven 7? Fine. I'll tell you. But, I want you to understand something first, because every account you've read has gotten this wrong. The Council reports, the hegemony after action files, even the memorial transcript from Sector Admiral Basirahol's desk. They all say the humans won. That is technically accurate. The way it is technically accurate to say that a fire heated a room. What actually happened at Ven 7 was something that doesn't fit in an after-action report. It doesn't fit in language if I am being precise about it, and I am always precise. My supervisor has noted this in my file as both my primary strength and the reason 3 different postings requested my reassignment. My name is Sevoclif. I was a 3rd-grade tactical observer for the Dravari Compact's 14th survey attachment. My role was documentation, observation, clinical removal from events. I was chosen for this posting because I am constitutionally incapable of panic, or so my psych evaluation stated. My psych evaluation had not accounted for humans. Nobody's had. Here is what the reports don't say. When the reinforcements arrived at Corridor Ven 7, when the human soldiers came through that dock in their battered suits with their mismatched weapons and their inexplicable calm, I was the one who met them. I was the one who stood at the manifest terminal and tried to process what I was looking at. I had 17 classification protocols for incoming Allied forces. I ran through all 17 in the first 4 seconds. None of them applied. What follows is my account. The complete one. Not the version I submitted to command. That version is accurate but surgical, the way an amputation is accurate. It removes the part that doesn't fit the form. This is the part that doesn't fit the form. I have been told I should not publish this. I have been told it will cause diplomatic complications, interspecies unease, a re-evaluation of the Compact's partnership agreements with the Terran Expeditionary Forces. Possibly. Probably. But, the Ven 7 corridor is still standing. The 40,000 civilians in the habitat ring are still alive. The Krethsal advance did not reach the inner systems. And, I watched a human being, bleeding from a wound that my medical protocols classified as non-survivable, tell a joke. I need you to understand that. Before anything else. They sent the deadliest people they had, asterisk, and the deadliest thing about them wasn't what you think. Read on. Part 1, what arrived. The manifest said 14. I counted 14 humans stepping through the docking collar of Ven 7's secondary bay, and the manifest was correct. And I remember thinking, this is a clerical error. Somewhere between the Terran Expeditionary Command's logistics chain and our emergency requisition, someone had misplaced a 0. We had requested 1,000. We had been told, through 3 layers of encrypted relay and 1 very terse communique from a human officer whose title translated loosely as Coordinator of Extreme Circumstance, which I had privately noted was a remarkable job title, and said something either very efficient or very disturbing about how humans organized distress. We had been told the reinforcements were on Route 14. The Krethsal advance fleet had 17 warships in the outer corridor. Our defensive grid had been reduced, over 6 days of engagement, to 2 functioning gun platforms and a cargo hauler that Dockmaster Irene Velsh had personally welded a railgun onto, which was either an act of inspiring resourcefulness or catastrophic engineering depending on which of our remaining structural integrity reports you consulted. I had consulted both. The railgun was firing. The hull was not happy about it. 40,000 civilians in the habitat ring above us. Evacuation routes sealed by the Krethsal's interdiction net. 6 days of engagement, 22 compact personnel dead, another 40 in medical suspension, and we had 2 gun platforms, a creative cargo hauler, and now 14 humans who were walking through my docking bay. I am noting, for the record, that my primary stress response is hyperfocus. When my threat assessment glands activate, which they do silently, producing no visible biological signal, which my supervisor described as unnerving and I described as professional, I tend to count things. Measurements. Inventory. The number of bolts on a bulkhead panel. It grounds me. I counted the humans. 14. Then, I counted them again, because the first count had to be wrong. Still 14. Their leader, I identified the leader because she was the one at the front, and, because the others arranged themselves with a subtle shift of weight when she stopped, the way a magnetic field orients particles without any of them being told to orient was shorter than I expected. My file on Homo sapiens standard morphology listed average height at approximately 1.7 Dravari units. She was perhaps 1.65. Her suit was a mottled gray-green with patches of newer material sewn over older damage, at least 3 distinct repair sites visible from where I stood, and she was carrying what my weapons catalog identified as a human kinetic rifle, but with modifications that my weapons catalog had no entry for. Something had been added to the barrel housing. Something improvised. I could not immediately determine its function. She looked at me. I looked at her. The entire exchange lasted perhaps 2 seconds. "You Sevoklith," she said. Her translator rendered this in standard Dravari phrasing. The question mark at the end was accurate. The tone of voice was not something the translator attempted to convey, and I did not yet have context for what that tone meant. Later I would learn it was the vocal register humans use when they are already 3 steps ahead of a conversation and, waiting with patience, they have decided to allocate precisely. I said. 3rd grade tactical observer, 14th survey attachment. I received your deployment signal 40 minutes ago and, I must advise, the manifest lists your complement as 14 personnel, which I believe is yeah, she said. A pause. The kind that is not empty. That's what we sent, she said. Behind her, the other 13 humans were moving with the quiet efficiency of people who have done this, arrived somewhere broken and frightening and not their problem enough times that the rhythm of it is automatic. 2 of them had already drifted toward the bay's secondary wall panel and were examining the structural readouts with an attention I did not expect. 1 was eating something from a foil packet. 1 was crouched on the deck, head tilted, pressing a palm flat against the hull plating. Listening. I did not know, at that moment, what he was listening for. "Sergeant Adeyemi," she said, which I processed as introduction. "Then, walk me through what we've got." I had a briefing prepared. 11 slides. 3-dimensional tactical overlay. Casualty summaries, grid status, Quetzal fleet positioning as of 6 hours ago, the most recent data we had, since our long-range sensors had been degraded to 40% in the 2nd day of engagement. I had prepared the briefing in the 40 minutes between receiving the deployment signal and the human's arrival, and it was thorough. She listened to approximately 40 seconds of it. "Okay," she said. "The 2 gun platforms, which one is more damaged?" "Platform Grelnos has sustained, which one?" "Grelnos," I said. "Good. That's the one we make look functional." She turned to a human behind her, tall, dark-skinned, moving with the slightly uneven gait of someone whose left leg had been repaired at some point and the repair had been good but not perfect. "Oh, say. You heard?" "Heard," he said, and peeled off toward the corridor without another word. I processed this. "I'm sorry," I said. "You intend to make it look functional?" "If their fleet commander thinks we have 2 gun platforms, he splits his attention." She shrugged. The gesture was small. Casual. Like this was logistics, not military deception against a fleet that outmassed us by a factor I preferred not to calculate. 1 real threat, 1 fake threat. He has to treat them both as real. "We do not have the personnel or material to convincingly simulate, we have Osei," she said, as if that completed a mathematical proof. I noted this for my log. I noted it under a category I was forced to create on the spot because my existing categories did not accommodate it. I called it Human Operational Confidence, basis unclear. She had already moved past me and was walking toward the tactical center. Her boots, I noticed, had a strip of adhesive tape around the left ankle. Not a repair, the boot itself appeared structurally sound. The tape was there because she had written something on it in small letters. I could not read it from this distance. I did not know why a person would write on their own boot. I followed her. The tactical center of Ven 7 had been a coordination hub for survey and logistics operations 3 weeks ago. It had the aesthetic of something designed for bureaucratic calm: smooth walls in Dravari standard gray, a central display table, 8 workstations, indirect lighting in the blue spectrum that my species found conducive to clear cognition. The lighting was now mostly emergency orange because the primary power conduit to this section had been damaged on day 3. The display table was functional, but one of its 4 projection nodes had been replaced with a unit salvaged from a maintenance drone. Dockmaster Irene Velsh had fixed it herself, which meant it worked but displayed everything at a 7-degree tilt, and we had all simply adjusted. Sergeant Adeyemi walked in and stood at the tilted display for perhaps 4 seconds. "The tilt's from the replacement node," I offered. "I can see that." She reached under the table, felt around for a moment, and adjusted something. The display corrected to vertical. I stared at it. "It's a calibration offset screw," she said, already looking at the tactical overlay. "Every salvaged node has one. You just have to find it." Irene Velsh, who had been standing in the corner with the particular stillness of someone who has been awake for 36 hours and reached the stage of exhaustion that resembles meditation, said nothing. Her secondary eyelids were half closed. She was looking at the human with an expression my species uses when we observe something that contradicts a prior certainty and we have not yet determined whether to update the certainty or question the observation. I am describing what Irene Velsh's face looked like. I am not describing what was happening inside my own head because my log is a professional document and I maintain that standard. But, I will note, the table had been tilted for 4 days. I had looked at it every day. I had not thought to reach under it. "Your sensor data shows the Quetzal fleet holding at the outer marker," Adeyemi said. It was not a question. "They're not pressing." "Why aren't they pressing?" "We have assessed that they're waiting for something," she said, and the edge in her voice was small but present. "That's not confidence. That's delay." "You know what they're waiting for?" "We believe reinforcements of their own, they might be." She was still looking at the display, but her posture had changed slightly. Something in the set of her shoulders. "Or they're waiting for us to do something they can react to." See the difference? I did not immediately see the difference. "I am noting this honestly." "A fleet that's confident attacks," she said. "A fleet that's waiting is a fleet that doesn't want to pay the price of the next move and is hoping you'll make it for them." Behind me, 2 more of her team had entered the tactical center. A young woman with close-cropped hair who smelled of something sharp and chemical, a scent I could not identify, was already at one of the workstations, pulling up the sensor grid with the practiced efficiency of someone who has worked with foreign systems before. A broader man, shorter, with the kind of stillness that reads as either profound calm or the period of quiet before a significant event, stood near the doorway and was eating what appeared to be a second foil packet of food. "Corporal Ferreira's going to pull your sensor logs from the last 6 days, Adeyemi said without looking away from the display. "Everything. Not the summaries, the raw data. Some of that data is," I stopped. "It is classified at a level that requires authorization from Survey Command, which I do not have current communication access to," said Oakleaf. She said my name the way my species says a recalibration word, a single sound used to reset a conversational vector. It was disconcerting how naturally she deployed it. 6 days of raw sensor data, she said. "Please." I gave her access to the classified sensor logs. I noted this in my log under a different new category: authorized disclosure, non-standard authorization process, justification pending. The human called Osei sent a status report from platform Grelnas at the 0.6 hour mark. The report was 4 lines. "Lights working. Targeting array cosmetic only, will rotate on schedule. Running active emission ping on modified interval. To any Quetzal tactical sensor, good morning, Adeyemi read it." A short sound came from her, not quite a word. A compressed syllable that the translator rendered as affirmative/amused, contextual. I looked up from my workstation. "He's got the platform's emission system transmitting false target lock signatures? With 4 personnel. In under an hour. He had 5 hours to think about it on the transport," she said. I looked at my own workstation. I had a status report on platform Grelnas that I had been updating daily for 6 days. It listed 17 separate non-functional systems. Ose had apparently read this same list and extracted from it a deception operation. I had extracted a list of 17 non-functional systems. I filed this discrepancy in my log. I was running out of category names. At the 1.2-hour mark, Corporal Ferreira looked up from the sensor logs. "Got something," she said. "There is a Dravari concept Velsha, which means, roughly, the quality of alertness in a space when a predator enters it. It is a subtle thing. A shift in the acoustic texture of a room, the micro-adjustments of everyone present. I had felt it in emergency briefings. I had felt it during the first Crethsal engagement 6 days ago. I felt it when Ferreira said got something. Adeyemi crossed to her in 4 steps. Day 3, Ferreira said, pulling up a sensor ghost, a faint, intermittent signal from the corridor's inner debris field, the ring of salvage and wreckage that any contested sector accumulates over years of traffic and minor disasters. This reading. I thought it was drift. Look at the interval. Adeyemi looked at the interval. I looked at the interval. The signal appeared every 2.3 standard minutes. Then, 2.3 minutes. Then, 2.3. It's not drift, Adeyemi said. No, said Ferreira. Something's in the debris field. Running silent. Running very silent. Our system flagged it as background noise 3 times. Ferreira had the particular expression of someone who has just won an argument with a piece of equipment. But, it's too regular. Background noise doesn't have manners. How big? Adeyemi said. Can't tell. The returns too fragmented. Ferreira leaned back, and there was something in how she did it, a loosening of tension that was not relaxation but recalculation. Could be a probe. Could be a scout. Could be a ship, Adeyemi said. The room was quiet. I became very interested in the sensor readout on my secondary screen. It showed the standard background radiation of the debris field, which I had been monitoring for 6 days and categorizing as standard background radiation. The screen was the same screen it had always been. The paint on the bezel had a small chip near the upper right corner. I noted the shape of the chip. I had apparently not noticed it before. It was irregular, roughly triangular. If there's a ship in that debris field, I said, and the Crethsal fleet commander knows it's there, he's not waiting for reinforcements, Adeyemi said. He's waiting for his flanking element to get into position. I had been briefing Compact Command for 6 days that the Crethsal were holding because they were awaiting reinforcement. Compact Command had accepted this assessment. I had accepted this assessment. The chip in the bezel was not quite triangular. More rhomboid. I spent a moment on the distinction. Our 2 gun platforms cover the outer corridor approach and the starboard arc, I said. My voice came out at normal registers. I was satisfied by this. If there is a vessel in the debris field to our spinward, it's a 3-axis engagement, Adeyemi said. They hit from the outer corridor, the flanking ship hits from spinward. We're trying to cover 2 directions with gun platforms that, she glanced at her own notes, have a shared rotation time of 42 seconds. 42 seconds is sufficient time for them to put 2 salvos through the gap. Yes. She was already moving back to the main display. When were they going to do it? The tactical assessment for Crethsal forces suggests a preference for when, she said. The same recalibration. Shorter this time. I checked the data. The patterns. The intervals between the ghost signal and the Crethsal fleet's own positioning adjustments over the past 6 days. The correlation was there. I had not looked for correlations. I had been tracking threats. I had not been tracking relationships between threats. Within the next 6 hours, I said. Possibly 4. The quiet in the room had a different texture now. Not the Velsha of predator alertness. Something else. A Dravari concept I was reaching for and could not quite locate, because the concept my culture has for this moment is the moment before a decision, the inhalation, the last instant of theoretical options. Adeyemi was already at the comm panel. Get me Ose, she said. What happened in the next hour is, in the official report, described as tactical repositioning of Allied assets in response to threat assessment update. This is accurate. It is also approximately as descriptive as saying that the formation of a planet is material accumulating near a gravitational center. True. Missing something. What actually happened is that 14 humans reorganized the defense of Ven 7 from the ground up, in under an hour, using the resources already present, and they did it in a way that I, who had been in tactical documentation for 11 years and had access to every resource assessment, every structural survey, every weapons inventory, had not conceived of as possible. Osei did not bring platform Grelnos back online. He converted it. The platform had no functional weapons systems. It had, however, 2 fully operational maneuvering thrusters, which I had listed in my damage report as irrelevant, since a gun platform does not need to move, and a power core that was intact. Osei had apparently read my damage report the same way a Dravari engineer reads a salvage manifest, not as a list of what was broken, but as a list of what was still there. He converted the platform into a mine layer. The materials he used were, and I want to be precise about this because it remains the most unsettling item in my inventory review, hull patch resin, emergency thruster fuel cells from the maintenance locker, and the targeting warheads from 6 non-functional missiles that I had marked as inert/disposal 3 days ago. He said, over calm, that the warheads were not actually inert. I asked him how he knew. Checked, he said. When did you check? When I read your inventory list this morning. I had written that inventory list. I had looked at those warheads. I had accepted the label inert/disposal because that was what was written on the casing. I found, upon reflection, that I had no follow-up question. Adeyemi gave me a sideways look from across the room. I categorized the look under human communication, nonverbal, subcategory, the look a person gives when they have decided not to say the thing they are thinking. I had a full category for this by end of day. It would be well populated. Meanwhile, the soldier with the 2 still quality whose name I had not yet caught was in engineering with 3 members of the remaining compact crew. He had not introduced himself to me. He had walked into engineering, looked at the power distribution panel for approximately 20 seconds, said this can do double cycle if you bypass the thermal governor, and then waited, in the way of someone who has made an obvious statement and is patient with the universe for not having caught up yet. Our chief engineer, a Dravari named Hasperek who had not slept in 2 days and who I would describe as professionally functional, socially removed from the universe, said, the thermal governor exists to prevent catastrophic power feedback. Yeah, said the human. So don't run it for more than 90 seconds at a stretch. Hasperek had looked at him. The human had looked back. You've done this before, Hasperek said. It was not quite a question. Different ship, the human said. Same problem. I got this account secondhand, from Hasperek's log. Hasperek is not given to descriptive language. His log entry read, *modified power cycle per human technical input. Preliminary test successful. Note, the human did not seem concerned about the possibility of catastrophic power feedback. Filed under, concerning *. I found, reading this, that I agreed with Hasperek's filing. At the 2.8-hour mark, the Krethsal fleet began to move. Not an attack. An adjustment. The kind of adjustment that precedes an attack, a gentle settling of position, the way a predator shifts weight before the lunge. Our sensor array, at 40%, caught the edge of it. Ferreira called it before the system flagged it. They're moving, she said. How long? Adeyemi said. At that drift rate? Hour and a half. Maybe less if the flanking ship is already moving. Adeyemi looked at the main display for a long moment. The overlay showed the corridor in full, the habitat ring above, the gun platforms at their positions, the Krethsal fleet a pale cluster at the outer marker, the debris field to spin ward with its invisible, patient ghost signal. She looked at it the way I look at a complex document, not reading it, exactly. Running it. Then, she looked at me. Sebokleth, she said. I need you to do something that's going to feel wrong. I am a third-grade tactical observer. My function is documentation and clinical analysis. I am selected for this role because I do not have strong feelings about operational decisions. My supervisor has noted this approvingly in 3 consecutive performance reviews. Tell me, I said. I need you to send a communication to the Krethsal Fleet Commander, she said. Standard distress frequency. Fleet band. I need it to sound like a scrambled internal signal that we accidentally broadcast externally. I processed this. You want me to send a false communication. I want you to send a real communication, she said. I want it to contain false information. The distinction seemed important to her. I filed it. What do I say? She told me. I sat at the comm panel for a moment after she finished. The panel hummed at a frequency my secondary auditory organs registered as slightly irritating, a minor hum, the kind you notice and then stop noticing and then suddenly notice again. I had been noticing it for 6 days. The communication she wanted me to send was, strategically, elegant. It was also the kind of elegant that only works once, and only works if the recipient is both suspicious and arrogant, suspicious enough to believe they've intercepted something real, arrogant enough to believe we'd be careless enough to broadcast it. You're gambling, I said, that their commander will treat this as intelligence rather than bait. I'm gambling, she said, that their commander has been waiting out here for 6 days watching a station that won't fold, and he wants a reason to believe this is the moment. People who want to believe something are bad at recognizing when it's handed to them on purpose. I thought about this. Then, I sent the communication. There is a Dravari word, thresh malat. It describes the state of having taken an action whose consequences have not yet arrived but whose arrival is now inevitable. A committed trajectory. The moment after the launch but before the impact. My people consider it one of the most uncomfortable states a person can occupy. We teach children to sit with thresh malat, to not flinch from the gap between action and consequence. I had practiced this my entire career. Sitting in that tactical center, the communication sent, the Krethsal fleet adjusting its position at the outer marker, the ghost signal in the debris field moving. Ferreira confirmed it moving, not fast, but moving. I found that my practice had not prepared me for this specific version of thresh malat, because I was not the one who had taken the action. I had taken an action decided by a human who had been on my station for less than 3 hours and had, in that time, appended 6 days of my tactical assessments, converted a broken gun platform into a mine layer, identified a hidden enemy vessel my sensors had been watching for days without seeing, and told me to lie to an enemy fleet commander. I looked at Adeyemi. She was standing with her arms crossed, watching the display, and there was a still, settled quality to her that I did not have a word for in Dravari. Not calm, exactly. Not confidence, exactly. The quality of a person who has already made their calculation and is now simply waiting for the universe to confirm the arithmetic. Her left boot was facing away from me. I could not read what she had written on the tape. I wanted, very specifically, to read what she had written on the tape. I noted this one in my log under a category I labeled irrelevant fixation. Cause unknown, the signal from the debris field moved again. 112 minutes until the Krethsal committed to their attack vector. I began preparing the next phase of my documentation. Outside, through the viewport, the corridor was cold and dark and full of things none of us had anticipated. In my experience, that sentence had always preceded disaster. I was not certain, for the first time in 11 years of tactical observation, that it still did. Part 2, the shape of a plan. The Krethsal fleet commander's name was Vethoral. I know this because his response to my false communication arrived 52 minutes after I sent it, and he signed it. He signed it. I had studied Krethsal tactical protocols for 2 years as part of my survey attachment on boarding. Nowhere in those materials did it suggest that Krethsal fleet commanders signed their transmissions. It is not a Krethsal custom. It was almost certainly intentional, a small act of dominance signaling, of I am not hiding from you, and that should tell you something about how this ends. I told Adeyemi about the signature. She made the sound that the translator rendered as affirmative/amused, contextual, again. A short, low exhale. Then, what did he say? I read the communication. It was a formal acceptance of a proposed one-to-one dialogue, a request for direct channel coordinates, and a time, 40 minutes from transmission. He had taken our bait completely. The scrambled broadcast I'd sent suggested, as Adeyemi instructed, that our civilian evacuation attempts had failed catastrophically, that internal communications between this station and Compact Command were deteriorating, and that a faction of our command structure was considering formal surrender to spare the habitat population. The communication had been made to sound like an accidental leak of an internal argument. None of this was true. We had attempted no evacuation. Our communications with Compact Command were simply absent because our relay had been destroyed on day 2, not degrading, destroyed. The fiction of internal surrender negotiations assumed there were multiple factions aboard who disagreed. There were not. There were approximately 40 functioning personnel, most of them exhausted, and their opinion regarding surrender could be summarized as, Compact Command staff do not surrender occupied stations to Krethsel forces, full stop. But Vethorel had believed it. He wants a dialogue channel, I told Adeyemi. He believes a surrender faction exists and is offering to negotiate directly, bypassing our command structure. He thinks he's being clever, she said. He thinks he is exploiting a crack in our command integrity. Right. She was already at the main display again, pulling up the fleet positioning data. And, when he opens that channel and starts talking to whoever he thinks is our surrender faction, where is his attention? I followed the logic. The communication channel. The negotiation. Not his flanking ship, she said. You're going to use the 40 minutes to Ose is going to use the 40 minutes, she said. And, Nowak. She said the last name toward the room in general, and the two-still man appeared from the engineering corridor as if he had been standing just out of frame the entire time, waiting for his name. I did not know he had been in the engineering corridor. I looked at the corridor entrance. He had come from the direction of the power distribution panel. The thermal governor bypass. The double cycle's ready, he said. The statement had the quality of an answer to a question no one had asked out loud. How long can we hold it? Adeyemi said. 90 seconds for sure. 2 minutes if Hosverek's confident. From behind me, without looking up from his station, Hosverek said, I am not confident about anything involving thermal bypass on a 6-year-old power core. 120, Nowak said, as if Hosverek had said I can hold it for 120 seconds. Hosverek looked at the back of Nowak's head. I looked at my own workstation. The secondary screen still had the sensor readout. The ghost signal from the debris field had advanced another 0.3 degrees of arc. The flanking ship, I was now thinking of it as the flanking ship, as a certainty rather than a possibility, which was itself a change in my operational thinking that had happened without my noticing when it happened, was moving on a slow trajectory that would bring it into the spin-ward attack corridor in approximately 90 minutes. The same 90 minutes during which Vethorel expected to be receiving a surrender negotiation. I looked at the tactical overlay. The display table projected the full three-dimensional map of the corridor in faint blue lines, and, with Ferreira's updated sensor overlay added in the last hour, the debris field no longer looked like an inert cloud. It looked like a space occupied by something with patience and intent. He won't negotiate in good faith, I said. Of course not, Adeyemi said. He'll use the channel to confirm our weaknesses. Assess our personnel. Look for deception. Yes. Then, we should not, that's exactly what we should give him, she said. He looks for deception and doesn't find it. He looks for weakness and finds more than he expects. He thinks he's reading us. A pause. He'll be reading exactly what we hand him. I processed the layers of this. There is a concept in Dravari strategic theory, Velmarin, the tactical mirror, the deliberate presentation of a true weakness that is simultaneously a prepared position. Old doctrine. Rarely used because it requires the enemy to be both intelligent and wrong in precisely calibrated ways. Adeyemi was proposing Velmarin with a 14-person strike team, a modified gun platform, a hidden mine layer, a thermal bypass power core, and a communication channel that would be operated by. I looked at the room. Who is going to speak on the channel? I said slowly, as the surrender faction. Adeyemi looked at me. I looked back. I don't speak Quetzal, I said. My Quetzal language file is, your standard is fine, she said. He'll be using a translator too. The effect matters more than the language. The effect. Sound tired, she said. Sound like someone who has been here for 6 days and has stopped believing in the outcome. Don't be convincing. Be almost convincing, the way a person is almost convincing when they're telling the truth and know they're going to lose. She was asking me to perform a specific emotional state with calibrated inaccuracy. I had been hired, specifically, for my inability to perform emotional states. I considered noting this. I looked at the time remaining before Vethoral's proposed dialogue window. 39 minutes. I'll need a script, I said. No script, she said. He'll hear a script. I looked at my workstation for a long moment. The bezel chip, rhomboid, not quite triangular. I had looked at this screen for 6 days and not noticed that chip until today. Savoklith, Adeyemi said. Her voice was not unkind. There was something in it that I did not have a category for, because the categories I build are based on precedent and I had no precedent for what this human was doing to my professional self-concept in real time. You've been watching this station hold for 6 days. You know what tired sounds like. You've been living it. She walked away before I could respond. Behind me, I heard Nowak return to engineering. I began drafting, then deleted the draft, then began again without it. Ferreira sat at the station nearest mine for the next hour. She did not speak to me, but she had a habit. I catalogued it at the 12-minute mark of drumming 2 fingers against her thigh when she was running calculations. Not both hands. Just the right. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. The rhythm was irregular enough that it did not fall into a pattern I could predict, which meant I kept noticing it. At the 30-minute mark she said, without looking up, "You're doing it right, for what it's worth." I looked at her. "The negotiation prep," she said. "I've seen people spiral before a play like this." "You're not spiraling." "I am not prone to spiraling," I said. "My stress responses present as hyperfocus." She glanced at me. A quick look. The corners of her eyes did something, not quite a smile, but a precursor to one. "What are you hyperfocusing on?" I looked at my screen. The lateral sensor array degradation rate. If we need to confirm the flanking ship's final approach vector, our current array coverage leaves a 43-degree gap on the spinward axis, she said. I know. Adeyemi knows. We're working around it. I stopped. How long have you been tracking that? I said. Since about 20 minutes after I started on the sensor logs. She tapped her thigh 3 times. Pause. Your observation team is good, by the way. The flagging on the ghost signal, whoever wrote that algorithm almost caught it. I wrote that algorithm, I said. She looked at me directly this time. You almost caught it, she said. There was no criticism in her tone. There was something that, after a moment, I identified as a genuine statement of fact delivered without the weight of implication, the way a person speaks when they mean exactly what they said and nothing adjacent to it. I had been assuming, since the humans arrived, that their competence was a commentary on my own failures. That the gap between what they saw and what I had seen meant something about my quality. Ferreira had not said anything like that. I had inferred it. I noted this in my log under a category I was still trying to name. I labeled it provisionally, self-assessment error, source, internal. The dialogue channel opened at the 41-minute mark. 2 minutes late. Vethoral, making a statement about who was waiting for whom. His voice through the channel was low. Multi-harmonic Quetzal commanders maintain a register that my species can hear but cannot reproduce, a dominance frequency that sits just below standard speech. My secondary auditory organs registered it as the acoustic equivalent of something large standing very close. I spoke. I do not want to transcribe the full dialogue here. It was 14 minutes long. I told Vethoral that our casualties were higher than reported. I told him our power systems were in terminal degradation, partly true, partly less urgent than I made it sound. I told him that a majority of the station's remaining personnel were civilians or civilian contractors who had been pressed into operational roles because we had no one else. All of this was true or almost true, delivered in the particular dead tone of a person who has accepted that true things are sometimes not sufficient to change an outcome. He did not respond to most of it directly. He asked questions. The remaining weapon systems, I gave him accurate numbers, which were bad. The civilian population distribution across the habitat ring accurate, worse than it sounded. Our communication status with Compact Command, I told him the relay was experiencing interference, which was technically true in the sense that total destruction counts as interference. He asked whether the station commander had been part of the discussions I represented. I told him that the station commander had different orders. This was true. Irene Velsh, who was standing behind me during this entire exchange and had been told to stand there and appear to exist without visibly communicating anything to me, had an expression that I would describe as professionally pained. Her orders were to look like someone whose subordinate was going behind her back. She was quite good at it. I later learned she had spent most of the dialogue calculating structural stress tolerances for the planned power cycle and was simply thinking very hard about numbers. This produced an expression that was, apparently, indistinguishable from betrayed authority. Humans called this, when I relate it later, a happy accident. I did not know enough, yet, to find this as funny as they did. I know now. Vethorel ended the channel with a non-commitment. These are considerations the fleet will deliberate, which meant he had gotten what he came for and was now deciding whether it changed his timetable. I sat in the silence after the channel closed. My hands, pressed flat against the console, were steady. My voice had been steady. My documentation had been steady for 6 days. I did not feel steady. I had no category for what I felt. I left it uncategorized. From across the room, Adeyemi said, "Good." One word. I looked at the console surface. The texture was a composite polymer, crosshatch pattern, the standard grip surface used on compact tactical consoles throughout the fleet. I had worked on consoles with this surface for 11 years. I had never noticed the depth of the crosshatch before. It was deeper than it looked, each small groove casting a shadow in the orange emergency lighting. Did he believe it? I said. He believed enough, she said. He'll adjust his timetable. Probably pull it forward. He thinks we're more vulnerable than he assessed and he doesn't want the window to close. Pulling forward means his flanking ship is still moving into position. He hasn't confirmed it's ready. He'll want to coordinate. She was at the display, and her voice was doing this settled arithmetic thing again. There's a window between when he decides to move and when his flanking ship confirms it's in position. That's when he's split. And, in that window, I said. Ose makes noise, she said. And, the flanking ship has to decide whether it keeps to its assigned vector or responds to the noise. If it responds to the noise, it breaks the flanking formation and we know where it is. And if it doesn't respond, then Ose has drawn its fire and we know it's there and we know its vector and we use the mines. The mine layer. Platform Grelnos, stripped and converted in under an hour. 6 non-inert warheads, hull patch resin, emergency fuel cells. Ose will be on a gun platform, I said. With no functional weapon systems. That the flanking ship will be shooting at. He'll be in a hardened operations core, she said. The rest of the platform is a target. The core is rated to take compact class weapons fire, I said. Kretzal kinetics at close range exceed, he knows, she said. There was a texture in those 2 words that I want to try to describe and I find that I cannot quite do it. It was not dismissal. It was not carelessness. It was the texture of a statement that is carrying more weight than its words, that he knows meant something like he chose anyway and something like I would not ask him if I thought he wouldn't come back and something like the thing my species calls Chauvel, the trust extended not because it is easy but because it has been tested and held a asterisk. I do not know if humans have a word for Chauvel, I did not ask. I looked at the mine layer trajectory on the display. The arc of platform Grelnos's new position. It was a good position, tactically. It was also exactly where the flanking ship would find it first. The display hummed. The emergency lighting cast everything in orange. Ferreira's fingers tapped her thigh. 3 times. Pause. 48 minutes later, the Crethsol fleet moved. Not slowly. The adjustment I had observed before, the Predator weight shift, was gone. This was commitment. 6 of the 17 warships broke from the holding position at the outer marker and drove inward, and the way they moved had a different quality than their previous adjustments, a certainty that read, even on our degraded sensors, as something that had made up its mind. There we go, Ferreira said. Our 2 functional gun platforms oriented. Platform Hessenrail, the real one, began cycling its firing solution. The display showed its targeting arc, clean and blue. Platform Grelnos, the one that had nothing functional except a mine layer and OSE, began rotating, its old targeting systems running their cosmetic display, looking on a Crethsol tactical readout like a gun platform cycling to fire. The 6 ships in the leading formation adjusted their approach vector in response. Fractionally. The way a formation adjusts to account for 2 threats instead of 1. Fleet Commander is splitting his formation's attention, I reported, though everyone in the room could see it on the display. His flanking ship, Adeyemi said. Where is it? Ferreira was already on the sensor array. Still in the debris field. Not moving. Waiting for his go signal. Looks like. There was a pause in the room. Not silence, the ship hummed, the display cycled, Hosferek's muttered technical monologue continued from the engineering bay as a low-grade constant, but, a pause in the quality of attention. A collective thresh malat, the moment after the action, before the consequence. I looked at the main display. The 6 advancing Crethsol ships. The 2 gun platforms. The debris field with its invisible patient occupant. The habitat ring above, with 40,000 people who did not know, in this moment, that the decision about whether they lived or died was being made by 14 humans who had been here for less than 4 hours. The young human soldier who had been eating from a foil packet when he arrived, I had still not learned his name, was standing at the starboard viewport. Looking out. He had finished the food at some point and was now turning the empty foil packet over in his hands, folding and refolding it into smaller and smaller rectangles. The foil caught the emergency lighting. I watched him fold it. He folded it 8 times before he ran out of foil to fold. Then, he looked at the tiny rectangle for a second, put it in his suit pocket, and turned back to his station. I was still watching the place where his hands had been. Fleets in the outer engagement corridor, Ferreira said. Hessenrail will have a firing solution in 40 seconds. Hold fire, Adeyemi said. I looked at her. Hold fire, she said again, to the platform calm, let them come in. Platform Hessenrail's commander, one of our compact officers, a young navigator named Teleros who had been running the platform without relief for 6 days because our rotation schedule had become fictional around day 3, transmitted back, confirm. Holding. There was strain in Teleros's voice that I recognized because I had been listening to it for 6 days. It was the strain of a person who was doing a hard thing and has been doing it so long they have stopped registering that it is hard. Adeyemi was waiting for the flanking ship to reveal itself. The longer she held fire against the approaching formation, the more pressure on the flanking ship's commander to move, to seize the window while our platforms weren't firing, to get into position and lock in the 3-axis engagement while Vethoral still had the initiative. The calculation was correct. I could see it. The problem was that every second of held fire was a second in which the approaching formation was closer, and the longer it took the flanking ship to move, the closer those ships would be when we opened fire, and closer meant, I need to note for the record, I said, that the current engagement geometry creates a significant risk of noted, Adeyemi said, without looking at me. The flanking ship is moving, Ferreira said. The ghost signal in the debris field lurched. Not the patient 0.3 degree increments of the past hours, a drive burn, a deliberate acceleration, something stepping out of cover into the open. There she is, said Adeyemi. And, in the same breath, before I had processed the full scope of the movement, Ose. Now. I have tried, in my documentation, to render this sequence in the clean sequential narrative that tactical reports require. Events A, B, C, in order, leading to outcome D. The problem is that what happened next happened in the space of 4 minutes, and, within those 4 minutes, approximately 11 significant things occurred in an order that my documentation training did not prepare me to track, because my documentation training assumes that events happen in series rather than in superimposed parallel chaos. I will try. Osei ignited his mine layer. Platform Grelnas, darkened, drifting, suddenly, blazed with a dry burn from its modified thrusters, accelerating toward the vector the flanking ship had committed to. Not at the flanking ship directly. Across its path. Between its committed position and the inner corridor. The flanking ship fired. Platform Grelnas took the first salvo on its forward structure. The display showed the hit brutal, immediate, a section of the platform's non-essential housing simply gone. The operations core, buried in the platform's aft section, did not register a hit. Osei sent a communication, 13 seconds after opening his drive burn. The communication was 6 words. Already past it. Check the nav *, the mine's hull patch resin, emergency fuel cells, 6 not actually inert warheads, were not on platform Grelnas. Osei had launched them from the platform 22 minutes earlier, on a cold trajectory, no drive burn, falling silent through the debris field on a vector he had calculated before we knew the flanking ship's final position and, had then, updated. Ferreira told me this later, 3 times in the last hour as the ghost signal refined. The mines were already there. The flanking ship drove directly into them. In the same 4 minutes, Platform Hessenrail opened fire on the advancing formation, the double-cycle power surge from our main core briefly tripling its shot capacity, 93 seconds, Nowak had said, and Teleros later reported it held for 101, and 2 of Vethoral's leading warships absorbed fire they had not calculated for. The formation fractured. 2 ships pulled back to reassess. One continued to advance, perhaps unable to abort its committed vector fast enough, and was the third ship to take Platform Hessenrail's fire before it found range for a return volley. The flanking ship, hit by 3 of the 6 mines, was not destroyed. It was stopped. Drive systems down. Weapons systems down. Life support, according to what we could pull from the debris field sensors, intact. Vethoral's fleet, having entered an engagement expecting a 3-axis collapse of a depleted defensive position and, instead finding its flanking element disabled and 2 leading ships damaged in the opening exchange, did what every tactical model I had studied said it would do. It reassessed. The advance stopped. Not a retreat. A halt. The particular stillness of a force reconsidering the price of the next move. In the tactical center, Ferreira let out a long breath through her teeth. I became very focused on the texture of my console surface. The crosshatch. The depth of each small groove. I had been counting the grooves for the last 90 seconds without being aware of it. I had reached 47. Osei, Adeyemi said, into the comm static. Then, here. Status? Forward section is open to vacuum. Operations core is fine. A pause. Had to hold on to the console during that last hit. Think I bent it. The console? The console, yeah. Not my hands. They're fine. They're good. Another pause. Is the flanking ship out? It's out. Silence on the channel. Then, okay. Good. The channel stayed open for another moment. Not dead air exactly. The quality of a line left open because the person on the other end needed a few seconds before they were ready to close it. Adeyemi stood at the main display, her arms at her sides, watching the Krethsal fleet hold its position. The orange emergency light came from her left, and her shadow fell across the display table, crossing the pale blue lines of the tactical overlay. Her left boot was facing me. I could read the tape. In small letters, in a human script I had learned in my second year of survey work, she had written, 11 more. I looked at it. 11 more. Not a tactical note. Not a system readout or a reminder. Something personal. The kind of thing you write on a boot when the boot is the thing you look at in the middle of the night, during the kind of nights that this posting had been full of, and you need a number. I did not ask her what it meant. I wrote it in my log, under the category I still had not named. Outside, the Kretzal fleet reconsidered its options. We had bought time. How much, I did not yet know. Part 3, the cost of staying Vethoral waited 9 hours. I know, now, that this was not hesitation. I assessed it as hesitation at the time, the Kretzal fleet holding position, the disabled flanking ship still drifting in the debris field with its life support intact, the leading formation pulled back to the outer marker, and I wrote 2 analysis reports during those 9 hours that described a fleet in recalculation, reassessing the cost of engagement. I was wrong about the nature of the recalculation. What Vethoral was actually doing, Adeyemi told me this later, in the same quiet tone she used for everything, as if the distinction between hesitating and preparing a second attempt were a minor administrative note and not, as I experienced it, a significant revision to the tactical picture, was waiting for a relief element from the outer corridor that he had not, until this engagement, needed to call. We had cost him enough that he called it. This was good news in the sense that it meant we had damaged his plan. It was bad news in the specific and non-abstract sense that a relief element from the outer corridor consisted of 8 additional warships that would be here in 9 hours. The 9 hours I had spent writing analysis reports. When Adeyemi told me this calmly, standing at the tactical display with the flat confidence of a person delivering a weather update, I looked at my 2 analysis reports for a moment and, then, moved them to an archive folder. Ferreira noticed. "You okay?" "I am updating my documentation," I said. She made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been something else. I had been on the station for 8 days. The humans had been here for 7 hours. I was still building my translation vocabulary for what each of their sounds meant, and Ferreira was specifically difficult because she did fewer of them than the others. "The 9 hours wasn't nothing," she said. "We put Osei's platform back together. Ran 3 repair cycles on Hessenrail. Hasferek got the power core back to standard, well, closer to standard. I checked Hasferek's most recent engineering log. The thermal governor had been reseated. The power core was running at 81% nominal. Hasferek had noted, in his entry, that this was better than he had expected and that the human, *Nowak, specialist rank, non-standard attachment *, had identified 2 additional points of degradation in the power distribution manifold that Hasferek had not previously flagged, and had addressed both. Hasferek had added, *I am unsure whether to be grateful or troubled that this person knows my ship's power systems better than I do after 7 hours. Both, I think *, I thought, both. Definitely both. How many ships can our 2 platforms hold? I asked. Ferreira's expression did something, not the precursor to smile from before. Something quieter. More considered. Against 8 fresh ships, with our current weapons load and power? She thought for a moment. Honestly? 4, maybe. If everything goes right. We cannot hold this corridor against Vethoral's full remaining force plus 8 reinforcements, I said. No, she said. I looked at the display. The Kretzal fleet at the outer marker. The debris field, where the flanking ship still drifted. The habitat ring above us. What is the plan? I said. She met my eyes, and, for a moment she looked like someone who was deciding how much to tell a person and, concluding that the full amount is the correct dose. Ask Adeyemi. Adeyemi was in the habitat ring. This was the first thing that surprised me. The habitat ring, Ven7's civilian population center, the 3-tiered residential and commercial structure that sat above the operations core like a crown, was not a tactical position. There was nothing in the habitat ring that had bearing on our defensive situation. It was where the 40,000 people lived who we were defending, and it was, as far as the military geometry of Ven7 was concerned, irrelevant to the next engagement. I found her on the 3rd tier, which had a commercial gallery that had been converted into an emergency shelter for the population sector closest to our last hull impact point. She was sitting on the floor, her back against a supply crate, talking to a small cluster of civilians, 6 of them, mixed species, a Dravari family cluster among them, with the unguarded quality of someone who has decided, in this moment, that the only useful thing is to be present. Not briefing them. Not managing them. Talking. I stood at the gallery entrance for a moment before she saw me. One of the Dravare children, perhaps 4 years old, the youngest age at which my species becomes curious about strangers rather than simply alarmed, was sitting next to her showing her something in its hands. I could not see what it was from the entrance. Adeyemi was looking at it with full attention. Not polite attention. Full. She said something. The child laughed. I did not have, in any of my files on Homo sapiens or Terran Expeditionary Force psychology, a category for this. A soldier, 7 hours into a defensive engagement against overwhelming force, with 8 more enemy warships inbound, sitting on a shelter floor looking at something a child was holding and saying something that made the child laugh. My stress responses are hyperfocus. My hyperfocus, in this moment, produced the following observation: the child was holding a folded piece of something shiny. A rectangle, smaller and smaller, folded 8 times. The soldier who had been turning the foil packet over in his hands at the viewport. He had been up here. He had given the foil to the child. I looked at the gallery wall. The texture of the panels was a composite material, lighter than the tactical center's polymer, designed to look residential and warm. It did look warm, in a way that the operational areas of Ven 7 did not. The emergency lighting was the same orange, but someone I could not determine when this had happened had strung a secondary line of lights along the upper gallery. A pale amber, warmer than the emergency red. Not standard issue lighting. Something personal, brought in from somewhere. Adeyemi saw me. She said something to the civilians. A leave-taking, short, stood with the ease of someone whose body does not complain about floor-sitting even after 7 hours of continuous operation, and walked toward me. "You're 9 hours," I said. 14 hours now, she said. Ferreira caught me up. "You were up here. Part of the time." She looked back at the gallery. The child was showing the foil rectangle to another child, demonstrating the folding with the serious intensity of someone sharing a technology. Some of them have been in that shelter for 4 days. Nobody's been up to talk to them. Our personnel have been busy. I know. No accusation. Simple fact. Doesn't mean they don't need someone to sit down. I processed this. My compact training on civilian management in contested stations was thorough: distribution of rations, medical protocol, communication about protective procedures, management of information flow to prevent panic. I had followed all of it. I had distributed rations on schedule. I had updated the civilian population on the tactical situation in appropriately measured terms twice daily. I had not sat on the shelter floor. The new fleet element, I said. 8 warships. You have a plan. Working on one. You have been in the habitat ring. And, working on a plan, she said. They're not mutually exclusive. We walked toward the lift that would take us back to the operations level. The gallery was behind us, the quiet murmur of civilians, the distant sound of a child demonstrating a folding technique. "There's a Quetzal Field Commander's protocol," Adeyemi said. When an operation is running longer than planned and costs exceed estimates, they have a formal recalculation threshold. At a certain loss percentage, the field commander is required, actually, to request secondary authorization from Fleet Command before committing further resources. I stopped walking. The Quetzal Fleet Command is 7 days communication lag from this sector, I said. Yes. If Vethoral crosses his recalculation threshold, he has to wait for authorization before he can use the relief element, she said. 7 days. Minimum. I looked at the lift panel. Then, back at her. Our current engagement has cost him 1 disabled flanking ship and 3 damaged leading vessels. What is his recalculation threshold? 15% of committed force value. Roughly. She pressed the lift call. He's at about 9 right now. 9. And his threshold is 15. We need to cost him another 6%, she said. Specifically in the next engagement. Before the relief element arrives. With 2 gun platforms. Against 17 Quetzal warships, minus the flanking ship. That's 16 operational warships. We're not going to fight 16 warships, she said. The lift opened. We're going to cost him the right 6%, she said, and stepped in. I do not want to make this next part sound clean. It was not clean. The second engagement, which began 14 hours into the humans posting on Ven 7 and, which lasted approximately 3 hours, was the most chaotic event I have witnessed in 11 years of tactical documentation, and I have documented 4 fleet engagements, 2 station defense operations, and 1 incident involving an experimental drive test that my supervisor made me file under gravitational anomaly because the accurate terminology would have triggered a 3-layer admiralty. Review. What I can document accurately is the outcome, and then I will tell you the parts that did not go into the official report. Vethoral advanced with 7 ships instead of 16. Not a full commitment, a probing force, structured to test our response without triggering his recalculation threshold. Adeyemi had anticipated a probing force. Platform Hessenrail held fire for longer than any tactical protocol I know of would sanction. The probing force came in, adjusted, began locking targeting solutions, and Teleros held fire. I know that Teleros's hands were shaking not from what I observed, but from what Teleros told me afterward, with the slightly disoriented manner of someone who has recently been in a situation that exceeded their operational training and is still in the process of filing it. She said hold, Teleros said. So I held. The probing force, receiving no fire response, adjusted its approach vector as Adeyemi had predicted it would, as probing forces always do when they find apparent gaps, and moved inward on the spinward axis. The spinward axis where platform Grelnas now waited. Ose had spent 9 hours reassembling platform Grelnas from its mine layer configuration back into something that looked like a functional gun platform. He had also, with the help of 2 compact crew members and an inventory of parts that I had listed as non-functional, made one modification that I had not been briefed on until 45 minutes before the engagement. The modification was this: platform Grelnasa's non-functional primary weapon housing had been converted into a directed reflector array. Not a weapon. A mirror, essentially a large curved surface of salvaged sensor relay paneling, carefully angled. When Vethoral's probing force moved onto the spinward axis and committed to targeting platform Grelnas, what their sensors saw was not one gun platform. They saw platform Grelnas, and, behind it, the reflected sensor signature of platform Hessenrail. 2 platforms. Same position. Same targeting arc. A formation that made no tactical sense unless you read it as a firing trap. 2 platforms coordinated to catch the probing force in a crossfire from a single axis. The probing force pulled back to regroup. In pulling back, it drove through the quadrant where Hessenrail's actual fire was waiting. 3 ships took hits. 2 sustained significant structural damage. 1 was destroyed, a corvette class that had broken formation when the probing force pulled back, moving faster than its escorts, ending up isolated in the corridor where Hessenrail had its cleanest possible targeting solution. Vethoral's total losses from this engagement: 1 corvette destroyed, 1 flanking ship disabled, 2 cruisers at reduced combat capability. Combined with the 3 damaged leading vessels from the first engagement. I ran the force value calculation. 17.3% of committed force value. 2 points above threshold. The relief element's arrival, 9 hours away, meant nothing. Vethoral could not commit it without Fleet Command authorization. Fleet Command was 7 days distant. By the time authorization could arrive, Compact Command's own response to our emergency relay, which Adeyemi had sent the moment the 9-hour window opened, using specific language she dictated and, which I had assumed was standard military communication until I later learned it was not, would have reached the sector command post. We had bought 7 days. 7 days, against all rational assessment of our position, using 14 people, a converted mine layer, a reflector array made from salvaged sensor panels, a modified power core, 6 not inert warheads, a deception operation I had personally performed, and a child's piece of folded foil. Here is the part that is not in the report. After the second engagement, in the quiet that followed, the tactical center with its tilted then corrected display, its orange emergency lighting, its crosshatch surface consoles, I was alone for approximately 20 minutes. Ferreira was in engineering. Adeyemi was on the con with the incoming compact response fleet, providing the debrief that would eventually become the official record. Nowak came in. He sat at one of the workstations and did something on it. Not tactical, a personal log, I think, though I did not read it. He sat with the stillness that I had catalogued on his arrival, the particular quality of a person whose default physical state looks like rest but probably isn't. After a few minutes, I said, "You wrote a log entry about the thermal governor bypass." He looked at me. "Hasverak noted it," I said. He found it concerning. The casualness about catastrophic power feedback. Nowak was quiet for a moment. "Have you read many reports about Terran Expeditionary Force operations? The ones before this sector?" "I have access to survey records," I said. "Some compact intelligence files. I have not focused on humans have been doing this kind of posting for about 40 years, he said. Show up somewhere that's running out of options. Figure out what's there. Make it work." He looked at the screen. You get a feeling for how close things can run before they stop running. The thermal governor, the risk is real. But, the risk is one thing. The alternative is you don't have power when you need it, and, then, there's no risk, there's just outcome. I thought about this. The casualness, I said. It isn't casualness. He turned to look at me directly. His eyes were a color that human optical descriptions call dark brown, but, in the orange emergency lighting they caught warmth in a way that made the color more complex than the classification suggested. What is it, then? I did not have, immediately, an answer. I reached for the Dravari vocabulary and found the gap, the same gap I had been finding all day, where the concept should be and wasn't. Not Valmarin, the tactical mirror. Not Chauvel, the tested trust. Not Thresh Malat, the committed trajectory. There was no word in Dravari for what Nowak was describing. The internalized knowledge of exactly how close you can stand to the edge because you have stood there before and counted the distance. The comfort in proximity to catastrophe that comes not from not caring about the catastrophe but from having spent enough time with it that you know its dimensions. Humans, I was slowly learning, have a lot of experiences for which my people have not built language. I think because my people do not seek those experiences. We build the language after the fact, and if the fact never happens, there is no word. Humans, it seemed, sought the edge often enough that they developed fluency in it. I don't have a word for it, I said. Nowak nodded. Like that was an answer he was used to. He went back to his log. Adeyemi found me 2 hours later in the habitat ring. I was not there for any professional reason. I want to document this honestly. I was in the habitat ring because I had gone to the commercial gallery to follow up on a civilian welfare check routine, scheduled, documented, and, because when I arrived, the same cluster of civilians were there, and the child was still there with the foil rectangle, and I had sat down. I don't know when I decided to sit down. I don't know how long I was there before Adeyemi walked in. She sat next to me. Not immediately talking. We watched the gallery, the civilians settling into the rhythms of the waiting that people develop when the waiting has gone on long enough that it becomes a texture of daily life. The amber lights someone had strung along the upper gallery made everything look like a place that intended to be lived in. 7 days, she said. Compact response fleet will arrive in 6, I said. Your communication secured a fast transit authorization. I know. I wrote it. A pause. The specific language, I said. In the relay. Station viable, population intact, holding. You repeated the word holding 3 times. Protocol, she said. Fast transit authorization is automatic when a station reports active civilian population and uses holding in 3 consecutive clauses. The response fleet doesn't need Admiralty approval. It just moves. I looked at the gallery wall. That protocol exists because someone wrote it about 20 years ago after a station in the outer systems ran out of time waiting for authorization, she said. Her voice was flat on this, in a way that was different from her usual operational flatness. This flatness had weight in it. I did not ask more. 11 more, I said. She looked at me. Your boot, I said. I'm sorry. It wasn't, it's fine. A silence. Not uncomfortable. The amber lights hummed at a frequency my secondary auditory organs found, for the first time since arriving on Ven 7, not irritating. 11 more, she said. 11 more postings until I rotate out. Standard civilian retirement. No more deployments. After how many? She was quiet for a moment. Enough that 11 feels close. I thought about the protocol she had written into the relay, or rather, that someone had written 20 years ago after a station ran out of time. I thought about Osei holding onto a console in a core section that was rated for compact class weapons fire and had received Quetzal kinetics and had held. I thought about Nowak standing in front of a thermal governor bypass and making a calculation based on knowledge earned at edges I had not personally visited. I thought about the foil packet, folded 8 times in the hands of a child who hadn't known, 3 hours ago, whether the ceiling above them would hold. Why do you keep doing it? I said. The postings. She didn't answer immediately. I had the sense she was looking at the question from several angles, the way she looked at tactical displays, running it. There's a version of that question, she said, where the answer is something about duty, or service, or the mission. Those answers are true. They're just not all of it. She was looking at the gallery. The child was asleep now, the foil rectangle still in its hands. We're good at this, she said. Specifically, pointedly good at this. Showing up somewhere that's out of options and finding that there are still options. A pause. That's not a boast. It's just a fact. We've been doing this long enough that it's a skill. And skills need somewhere to go. I thought about the 11 years of my documentation career. The skills I had built: cataloging, analysis, threat assessment, report structure. The gap between those skills and what I had watched 14 humans do in 17 hours on this station. I had skills. I had used them. I had almost caught a ghost signal. I had delivered a functional deception dialogue on 4 hours' notice. I had found a calibration screw I had been living next to for 4 days. Almost. I thought about the category in my log I still had not named. The one I had been accumulating entries in since the moment the humans walked through my docking bay. Not human operational confidence, basis unclear, not irrelevant fixation, cause unknown. I closed the old category. Named a new one. I named it things that were already possible, because that was what it was, all of it. The mine layer built from inventory I had read and assessed and accepted as inert. The sensor ghost I had written an algorithm that almost caught. The calibration screw under the display table I had worked next to for 4 days. The 39 minutes of raw sensor data that contained a pattern I had been watching without seeing. None of it was impossible. None of it required something my station did not have. It required looking at what was there and finding the options I had not looked for. I had been documenting the limitations. They had been documenting the possibilities. You don't think of yourselves as extraordinary, I said. She thought about this for a moment. Some humans do, she said. They're usually the ones you don't want showing up in a crisis. I looked at the foil rectangle in the sleeping child's hands. The ones you do want, I said. Yeah, she said. They just see a problem. They just work the problem. Outside, the Quetzal fleet waited at the outer marker. 7 days until its authorization. 6 days until the compact response fleet arrived. A margin of 1 day in which we were still holding, still the only thing between 40,000 people and a fleet that had run out of clean options. 1 day's margin, bought by 14 people, a mine layer, a reflector array, and a deception operation I had performed with my own voice. I looked at the sleeping child. Then, at the amber lights along the gallery. Then, at Adeyemi, who was also looking at the lights with the settled, arithmetic quality that I had learned, over 17 hours, was not absence of feeling but the presence of it in a form that did not require display. There is a word in Dravari, Velashran. It means, approximately, the specific weight of carrying something you did not expect to carry. Not a burden. Not exactly. More the feeling of looking down at your hands and finding them holding something that was not there before, and realizing that you don't want to put it down. I noted this in my log. In the new category. Then, I added, I don't think I will put it down. The amber lights hummed. Outside, the corridor held.